Hello and welcome to the sub-variations of variation 38. We have 15 sub-variations and I'm going to be doing them in 3 videos again because I think that's just more practical to work with, because it will be an unbelievably long video otherwise if I make it in one. So there'll be 3 videos coming out on the sub-variations, and remember, the sub-variations are where you get the real benefit from this variation. So it's important to practice all of them, not just the ones which you perhaps find easy, but particularly give special attention to the ones you find more difficult, because that's what will improve your bow technique. Another thing I'd like to mention is that I'll be demonstrating the sub-variations just on the first line of variation 38 because it's more practical to work with, and if I would play the sub-variations through the whole variation, it would just make it unnecessarily long, and I don't think you'd get that much benefit from it. But you should practice the sub-variations in the whole variation, not just the first line, because there's a big difference if you do these bowings for just one line or if you do them for the whole variation, because you might tense up somewhere and you wouldn't notice that in the first line, but you might notice that after 3 or 4 lines, and that will tell you that you still have a tension problem. So practice the whole variation with each sub-variation. Sub-variation 1, we have a slur on the down bow and then 3 spiccato notes on the up bow. Most important thing is not to lift the bow after the down bow. The transition between the down bow and the up bow happens on the string, and you lift your bow after the first up bow spiccato note. So the transition, the bow change, happens on the string. Lift the bow after the first up bow spiccato note. The change of direction gets the bow to lift off. So just practice that at first. Notice how you add weight for the down bow to stop the bow from bouncing, and the lift off makes the bow light. So it's heavy, light, heavy, light. My wrist goes down for the down bow and comes up for the up bow to make the bow light. Not as much as I'm showing now, it's a lot less. So you go down, up, and then you just add the other notes. Practice this forte at the frog. Just the first figure, and then you can add the rest. The bow is heavy at the frog, so the forte is done by the bow. You need a bit more bow at the frog. The movements are bigger at the frog. You're also bouncing a bit higher, but you still have this heavy, light, heavy, light. To play this bowing piano in the middle, what you do is you make everything smaller. You use less bow and you bounce less high. So everything becomes smaller. The horizontal movements become smaller, you use less bow. The vertical movements become smaller, you don't bounce as high. And that's actually the only thing you have to change. The piano happens on its own because the bow is lighter in the middle. So the bow does the piano, and you just use less bow and don't bounce as high. You're still adding some weight for the down bow and taking weight away from the up bow, because the whole principle is exactly the same. It's just reduced in size. You can hardly see the wrist movement, but one can feel it. So you're adding a little bit of weight and taking it away. It's exactly the same movement as you're doing at the frog, just everything is much smaller. Subvariation 2 has one detached note followed by a slur and then 3 triplets spiccato. So we have 1 triplet on the string and 3 triplets off the string. This is the same bowing as variation 34, subvariation 6, but upside down. And it feels different when it's upside down. Otherwise, the principle is exactly the same. The figure which is on the string alternately starts down bow and up bow, and we're working with weight again, because the detached note and the slur, the triplet which is on the string, has to have more weight so that the bow doesn't bounce, and the 3 spiccato triplets need less weight. The bow has to be light again for the bow to be able to bounce. Again, the wrist has to be dropped to add the weight for the figure on the string, and lifted to take weight away for the figure off the string. It's not very much. One can feel it when one's playing it, but it's hardly visible. Start slowly at first to get used to the coordination. When you play it slower, the wrist movement becomes a little bit bigger. For the figure that starts up bow, that's always a bit uncomfortable. I have an image which I find very helpful. I've mentioned it in other variations, particularly in variation 34 already. It's the image of going into sand with a spade, feeling the resistance of the sand. Imagine the bow is going into the string and you're feeling the resistance of the string in the up bow. That helps a lot to stop the up bow from bouncing and getting the bow to go into the string. I find that very helpful. This is supposed to be played forte at the frog again. So start with that. That's the bigger movement. Again, you're using a bit more bow and you're bouncing a bit higher. Speed it up very gradually. Start very slow to get used to the coordination and very gradually speed it up. Remember, very close string crossings. You don't want the string crossings to be any larger than they need to be. And to play this piano in the middle, again, it's exactly the same principle, just everything is smaller. You use less bow and you bounce less high. Stay very close to the string. Don't bounce very high. Use very little bow. And the piano happens on its own because the bow is so much lighter in the middle than it is at the frog. Subvariation 3A is the same as variation 34, subvariation 10, but again the figure is upside down. This is ricochet. That's our most passive bowing. The bow does almost everything on its own. We just determine the direction, and each triplet starts down bow. Now, the down bow needs to have enough energy for the 2 up bows to happen on their own. We give a kick on the down bow, and the kick and the change of direction is one action, like this. Down bow and the change of direction is one action. Start with just one triplet at first. So you give a strong impulse on the down bow, the change of direction happens automatically, it's part of the same action, and the two up bows happen on their own. And then you do two. And then you do three. It can help to practice it slowly. It's no longer ricochet then, but it can help to practice it slowly. But even there, the down bow and the change of direction and the two up bows, which happen on their own, that's all one action. It's not two or three actions. That's very important. Make sure you keep your upper arm and shoulder relaxed. Consciously relax it as soon as you've given the impulse on the down bow. So each triplet is just one action. That's probably the most important thing to remember. If you try to do it in two or three actions, then that won't work out. The impulse of the down bow makes everything else happen. Subvariation 3B is also ricochet. The principle is the same as in subvariation 3A, but here all the triplets start on an up bow. The bowings are reversed. In subvariation 3A, the kick that we had to give, which had to have enough energy for the two up bows to happen, that was on a down bow, so we had gravity on our side. That makes it a lot easier. Here, we have to give that same kick on the up bow because the principle is the same. The up bow has to have enough energy for the two down bows to happen on their own. But here, we're working against gravity, so we have to consciously put more energy into this up bow kick. It requires a bit more strength. You're moving with more energy in the up bow because there has to be enough energy left for the down bows. You have to relax immediately afterwards, but this movement does require quite a high speed so that there's enough energy left over. It's also one action. The up bow kick and the change of direction is one action. You can practice it in the air like I'm showing here a few times. One action. And the two down bows happen automatically. They happen on their own. The bow does those. We don't do those. So each triplet, again, is just one action. Practice just one at first. That really helps. One action, just the up bow, which has enough energy for the change of direction and the two down bows to happen on their own. And then you do two. And then you do 3 and 4. And once you can do 4, you can go on. Be careful that you don't tense up because you have to put more energy into this up bow. So the danger of tensing up is greater. You have to be careful not to tense up. And it can also happen to just practice the up bows a couple of times. Because that's where your awareness has to be. Everything else just happens. Your awareness needs to be on the up bows. Make sure you stay very relaxed and make sure you really feel that the down bows happen on their own. The bow does those. It's the up bow with enough energy which gets all of this to happen. Sub-variation 4 is the same as the original variation 34, except again, it's upside down. Start by practicing it slowly to get used to the coordination, because that's again different from what we had before. Make sure your string crossings are very small. You don't want to be any further away from the adjacent string than you need to be. And particularly in bar 4, now we have a string crossing going from the G string to the A string. Make that as small as possible, no bigger than it has to be. It helped me a lot just to practice that a couple of times. Speed it up very gradually. Make sure you're completely relaxed. It's all spiccato. You're supposed to do it forte at the frog. Start off with that. That's the bigger movement. The bow is heavier, so that makes the forte, but we also have more control because our hand is closer to where the bow hairs connect with the string. So the movements are bigger. We use a bit more bow and we bounce a bit higher. We have more finger action, and the forte happens because the bow is heavy at the frog. To do this piano in the middle, same principle as before, everything just becomes really small. You use very little bow and you don't let the bow bounce very high at all. There it's even more important to have very close string crossings. It helps to tilt the bow a little bit because that reduces the tension of the hairs, and then your bow won't bounce as high. Very little bow, very close string crossings, and don't let the bow bounce too high. The piano happens on its own because the bow is much lighter here and our movements are very small, so we don't do the piano, the bow does the piano. This was sub variations 1 through 4, and I will continue with the next sub variations in the next videos. I hope you find this useful. Of course, as always, let me know if you have any questions, and happy practicing.